Hey, Julie.
Hi. Okay. Okay, I think we'll get started now and I'll just let people in as they arrive. So, welcome everybody.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Karen Pinzolo. I think I know most of you. I'm the director of the South Jersey Cultural Alliance, and we're so glad you came today. It's going to be a real treat. I walked into Perkins about, it was last fall, I guess, and saw his photographs, James' photographs all over. Erik's photographs all over, and the beautiful Perkins, and I fell in love. And then I got to meet Erik, and I'm excited for all of you to meet Erik as well. So Julie, if you want to introduce Erik, we can get started.
Sure. Hi everybody. So today we are having a South Jersey Creatives at the Table session that is highlighting Camden artists. We partnered with Cooper's Ferry Partnership and a New View Camden to find some artists in the Camden area that could host sessions to talk about the work they're doing and what it means to be an artist in Camden and how they feel like that informs their work and how their work is helping to support the community that they live in. So today we have Erik James Montgomery, fine art photographer and also founder of the EMJ Foundation, or I'm sorry, EJM Foundation, which helps youth to overcome challenges and struggles through photography and the arts. So we're going to have a fantastic presentation from Erik today. I'm very excited to get started. So I will turn it over to you, Erik, and you can share with the group.
So good afternoon, everybody. Very excited to be here today, and let me bring up my presentation at the same time. And here we go. 1 second. Of course, things always go wrong. Right. Okay. Let me know if you see a triptych of myself. Do you see my slides? Awesome.
Yes,
okay, so here we go. Awesome. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Erik James Montgomery, and I'm very honored to be here today. Thanks to everybody at South Jersey Cultural for bringing me here. And I'm going to share a few things about myself and my artistry. And as you can see here, there are 3 photographs of myself, and that pretty much spans the 31-year career that I've had in photography. I originally started in a town called East Orange, New Jersey, which is right next to Newark, New Jersey, about 1.5 hours from here. And I originally started off as a graffiti artist. And when I touched the camera for the first time, I knew that it was the perfect match. Shortly thereafter, I read every book imaginable dealing with photography from my local library. And then later on, when I went to school, I also took photography classes and things of that nature. 31 years later, I am still creating photographs. I do a lot of public artwork where you would see photographs of mine and of my students in public spaces. A lot of the communities I serve, they won't go to the MoMA or the PMA, but they'll go to their local bodega or they'll go to a local community event. And if I could put these images in places that they would frequent, then they'll be able to absorb the artistry that is sometimes not always accessible to them. So that's very important to me. And because of things of that nature, I created a nonprofit organization called the Erik James Montgomery Foundation. And it has its own base right here in Camden, New Jersey, but we have a huge reach. We have a summer camp up in Bear Mountain, New York. It's called Camp Winona, where we give at-risk youth the ability to go away to an overnight camp for a 2 to 3 week span per session. And a lot of these students are really not able to have these type of opportunities afforded to them because of economic situations and just a myriad of other issues that they're dealing with. So this is the first time they're actually going to a camp, and it's really revolutionary for them. And while they're up there, not only are you learning about nature, but they're also learning about photography and art and things of that nature. Additionally, I also teach photography in person and virtually. I've been doing that for over 20 years. Because of COVID, of course, we're doing a lot of things virtually, and I do the majority of my teaching right here in my studio. When I first moved down to South Jersey, it was in 2020. And the first time I visited Camden, I instantly made a connection. It reminded me a lot of Newark, a whole lot of Newark. And shortly thereafter, I started working with individuals who were battling drug and alcohol addiction, and a lot of them were from Camden. So I would see them at the organization that I was working with, and then later on, I would see them along the streets of Camden, and we just instantly just made so many connections as far as accountability. Being able to know that I see you not only at my job, but I see you in the streets as well. So it helped them to stand the straight and narrow in so many words. But in that, hearing their stories and hearing their love for Camden really added another layer of love that I have for the city. So I knew that eventually I wanted to make Camden my home base for my photography classes and for my nonprofit organization. So here, this next picture that's coming up, okay. This is actually my studio. It's a panoramic view of my studio. Here is where I do the majority of my art creation. We offer one-on-one and small classes in this space, and then I also do photo shoots and virtual learning as well. I recently built a dark room in a studio 2 doors down from here. Oh, by the way, I'm located at Camden Fireworks, which is at 1813 South Broadway, right here in Camden, New Jersey. Here at Camden Fireworks, we have several artist studios, and I have 2 of those spaces. This is the second space, and I converted into a working darkroom. And here, young and not so young people can come and learn all things darkroom, whether you're just beginning or you're a professional. You can come in and get some pictures created. So if you're interested in that, definitely contact me. And this is our newest venture. We're in negotiations now to open up the first focused gallery. This focused gallery will serve as the template to have satellite galleries all throughout the United States and eventually throughout the world. When I first started doing photography in the early 1990s, it was very hard for people like me who wanted to exhibit their work to have galleries and museums to even open the doors, let alone look at our artwork. So there were years that went by that we weren't able to show our artistry. So very early on my art experiences, I started producing my own art shows. Our first art show was in 1994. We rented a studio and we had a whole week of exhibitions. And from there, that self-determination just carried through until now. And with the focus galleries, you will see where my students, whether they're teenagers or college students, they will be able to showcase their artwork at this gallery. And they will not only be able to showcase their work, but they will learn the behind the scenes of how to present and sell your work without getting robbed. That's very important to me. So that's coming up soon. And that brings us to Camden as a campus. As a photographer, it's very important for me to document the beauty and the reality of what I see. And in Camden, you will get plenty of both. And I appreciate that over the nearly 20, 25 years that I've been down here, that I have been accepted in the community, where as I walk around with my camera, as I introduce myself, I have never had anybody tell me, no, I don't want you to take my picture. And that's really unheard of. For any of you who are photographers working in the inner city, that's almost unheard of. But I'm very thankful for that. I think that really says a lot about how people gauge my honesty, where I'm not trying to exploit anybody, but I'm really trying to celebrate the people of Camden. And here's a few of those pictures. This is a project that I have called Three Kings, and you're going to see a lot of these adhere to buildings all across the city. And here you see three young men who have king crowns on. And for me, working with photography, not only does it celebrate the beauty of the individuals, but it also builds up the self-esteem of young people as well. I know when I was growing up, I suffered from very low self-esteem, and photography really helped break me out of that shell, out of that dark space, and I want to pass that on to others. So a lot of times when I'm taking photographs, I'm really letting people know that beauty is one thing on the outside, but true beauty is what's found on the inside, whether you're male or female. And in that, with this Three Kings and Queens project, I'm really celebrating the inner and outer beauty of these young people. And I'm also educating them on the importance of getting their education, because that's the way to really secure your future. And that's how we see these three kings here. I was actually driving back from Rutgers University. I was teaching a class a few years ago, and it was a rainy day, and I saw this gentleman leaning on these two large yellow doors, not too far from Broadway in downtown Camden. And the way that he was comfortably sitting with these birthday balloons, it really caught my eye. So I approached him and I introduced myself and I asked him, could I take a few pictures? He agreed. And I snapped a few photographs and then I started having a conversation with him. He told me that that day was his birthday and that his friends, who are also homeless, took the last bit of money that they had and they went to a local Rite Aid to buy these 4 birthday balloons for him. And that really blew my mind, because we all have had birthdays where you feel like, oh, woe is me. No one called me, or I didn't get the gifts that I wanted, or anything of that nature, right? But in here, you see a homeless man who is living in a box, literally. And his roof is a broken umbrella. And his gift is 4 balloons that his homeless friends bought for him. And those $4 that they spent on the balloons, they easily could have bought something to eat, right? So that just showed me the selflessness of humankind. And I don't think that's celebrated enough, especially when it deals with people who are less fortunate than us. So I named this picture Happy Birthday Anyhow. This gentleman I saw walking across the street on Ferry Avenue. There's a library right on Ferry Avenue, and he had this undershirt on top of his head. In the inner city, those undershirts are, they're called wife beaters. I hate that title, but for some odd reason, they're called wife beaters, right? So he had this undershirt on over his head after playing basketball, and he was walking to the library. Pulled over my car, introduced myself. You're gonna hear this a lot. Introduced myself, and then I asked God to take a few pictures of him. And this is right outside the entrance of the library. And we did 3 photos. And he naturally just turned his head for all 3 photos. And that really worked for me to create this triptych. And I did a play on words. So as opposed to focusing on the wife beater, which I don't agree with, but I named this life beater because so many times young men are really in a competition of life and death. And I might touch on this a little bit more, but while I'm here, we lived in a day and times that so many young men, and even men of my age and older, it's an everyday thought that today may be our last day. And unless you have lived that life, and unless you know what I'm talking about, it is unfathomable for you to understand the pressure and stress that comes with that at any given moment, this day may be my last. Um, I have two adult daughters, and I have my youngest daughter. She told me one time that please don't drive at night with your hood on your head. And this is the winter time. And for her to show me that concern, and we didn't have to talk any deeper about that subject because we got what we were talking about. We understood where we were coming from. And she was afraid for her father's life simply for wearing a hood on his head, driving a legal car with legal registration. All my paperwork is in order. I'm not a criminal. If anything, I'm working for justice for all people. But she knew that a lot of times people would judge you because of the color of your skin and not the content of your character. So in that, I wanted to create this image to show that for so many men of color, every day we're trying to beat the fight of death over life. A lot of times I will bring my own personal spirituality into my photographs. I'm a Christian, and you will see that in some of my work. I take a lot of scripture and I reinterpret it into photographs. This picture was taken in 2010 in Camden on Princess Avenue. Princess Avenue is one of the rougher streets, I would say. When I took this photograph, I could briefly say that it was me, the gentleman that you see there, and his stepfather. His stepfather grew up in Camden, and he actually grew up on that street. And there's something that we call a hood pass. A hood pass is pretty much like if you remember when you were in school, you would need a hall pass to walk freely in the halls. Well, a hood pass is where in certain neighborhoods, if you don't know somebody from that neighborhood, it may not work out too well for you. So fortunately, my friend, his stepfather had a hood pass for us to take these photographs on that street. And what you see here is 3 outlined bodies on either side of the gentleman walking in the middle of the street. Inside his right hand, he has a Bible. Behind him is a caution tape waving in the wind, which is a play on words where we often say we are throwing caution to the wind. And a lot of people live their lives that way. Behind him is a lot of bright lights, but in front of him is a lot of darkness. So he's actually walking towards the darkness, but in that he's actually walking to his brighter future. And Psalm 23, 4a is a very famous psalm where it goes, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. So that just states that although there may be crime and a lot of negativity at some times around us, that we don't have to A, become a victim of our environment, and that B, in my opinion, through faith, we could help turn the narrative from negative to positive. So that's Psalm 23. This picture is very interesting to me. 2 years ago, I was driving home from the studio, and not too far from my studio here, there was a huge celebration going on. And I didn't know any of these individuals, but I pulled over and I introduced myself. I let them know I'm a photographer. I'm documenting Camden. Speaking of which, one of my websites is called Camden360.com. And you can see a lot of these photos of Camden residents and of Camden scenes right at that website. And I'll share a link with all of you later. But in this picture, I titled it Mourning Death, Celebrating Life. And the short of it is the gentleman that you could see right next to the flowers, he has a black t-shirt on and it has a grenade on his t-shirt and he has his hands up. If you look very carefully, you may not be able to understand or appreciate, but he only has half of a body. His body from his rib cage down is gone. Okay, so he normally wheels around in a wheelchair, but in that picture, he decided not to use the wheelchair. And I focused on him not because of his disability, quote unquote, but because that was his son whose life they were celebrating. He was killed. I'm not going to go into the background of how he was killed. I'm not going to go into the background of a lot of these individuals who, yeah, I won't go into the background of a lot of these individuals. But in that, I just found it very interesting that in the inner city, we have come, we have become so accustomed to celebrating the life of our lost family members, our friends, especially when it comes to gun tragedy, drug overdose, things of that nature, that if we're not careful, we can become numb to it, we become callous to it, and it almost becomes expected. If you talk to some students in inner cities, a lot of times they're not expecting to become an adult of my age, right? A lot of them, they see middle age as 10. And if they become 21, that is a miracle. That shouldn't be. So in this picture, it just had me really think about the way that we think about the lives that we live and how we celebrate that life. This picture, I was driving, again, a common theme when it comes down to Camden. But whenever I find something interesting, I will definitely pull over and take pictures of it. In this picture, I saw this father visiting his son, and I didn't know him from Adam. I introduced myself and I asked him, could I take a picture of him? And what they're doing on the left-hand side, that's what they were doing when I drove past them. He was just throwing his son up in the air, and his son was loving it. And the building had this bright color orange, and it just really attracted me. So after I introduced myself, he said, sure, take pictures and just send them to me afterwards, which I always try to do. So I got really low. It's called worm's eye view, when you get really low and you look up to your subjects. And I wanted to show them as being larger than life, but to also do a play on perspectives that I'm looking up to the father and the child, which is not always celebrated. A lot of times you hear about deadbeat dads. A lot of times you hear about absentee fathers. But here you see a father who is visible. And you see that the son is enjoying his time with his father. So I wanted to document that because it's not celebrated enough. And then on the right-hand side, right across the street, I noticed this abandoned building, and you could see the blight that this building is just exuding. And in that, the father sat down, and it's interesting to me that he pulled out a knot of money. It had to be about $500-600, and he just started spreading it out, and he started counting it with his son. And you really can't appreciate it scale-wise in the picture unless you really zoom in. But he's showing, the father is showing his son what he's taking pride in. And in that, and we're not going to go into how that money was, how he gained that money. He could have had a job. Maybe he got it from some other ways. I'm not here to talk about that. What I am here to talk about is that I found it interesting that this young man found pride to not only give life lessons on having fun with his son, but to also teach him the value of money. And I'm hoping that he would teach him to make money the correct way and things of that nature. So a lot of times we don't see these life lessons celebrated in the inner city. Speaking of celebrating things in the inner city, I am one of several artists who was selected by the A New View of Camden team, financed by Bloomberg Philanthropies a couple years ago, to create public works of art throughout Camden. Very appreciative of that. And you may hear a little bit of that, more of that right before we end today. But on April 20th, which is on April 22nd, on Earth Day, next Thursday, you're going to see a huge citywide celebration and ribbon cutting for this event. So I really hope that you are able to attend, whether it's virtually or in person, but you're going to see all of the artwork that the several artists had created. Here, you're going to see some of the images that I created for my project called Camden is Bright, Not Blight. This is one of my students. And here you can see that she's holding a camera, and she said that Camden is beautiful. Each participant had their portrait taken by me, and they finished the prompt of what Camden means to them. All of these people live in Camden. The youngest person was going on 2 years old, and the oldest person is 118 years old. Believe it or not. So all of these are Camden residents. This is my good friend and brother in Christ, William Butler, over to the left. He said Camden is creative. We see Camden is talented. Camden is my life. Camden is my name, loved, and a vibe. You can actually see several of these installations throughout the city. The largest installation is right on Mount Ephraim Avenue, 850 Mount Ephraim Avenue. You can see that if you're on the PACO train, if you're driving on Route 676, or if you're walking right down Mount Ephraim, you can actually see this large installation where there are 12 portraits posted on this abandoned building. For me, I chose Camden is Bright, Not Blight, because illegal dumping is the main focus of why we're creating these public works of art throughout Camden, to not only beautify the city, but to also give attention to the millions of dollars that the city spends on cleaning up our city from illegal dumping. And it shouldn't have to be that way. We shouldn't have to have people come in from other cities and dump their garbage, their trash, their tires, and it's crazy. But in that, not only is the city cleaning it up, but I felt the need to rewrite the narrative and say that not only is Camden being dumped on illegally with their trash, but we're also getting dumped on with our words. So a lot of times you'll hear that Camden is the most dangerous city, or Camden is the ghetto, or, oh, why would you set up shop in Camden? Like, can anything good come out of Camden, right? And all of that. And we're really here to debunk that, especially if you're from Camden and you're representing Camden. You have a heart and a desire to really rewrite that narrative. So with my project, that's what I'm doing here. And that leads me to Red, White, Blue, and You. This is an ongoing exhibition that I've had for the past 2 years. This is the third year. And in that, I'm exploring how people of color are really dealing with racism, classism, prejudice in a visual type of aspect. So I've created images like you see here. Some are from several years ago and some are really recent. This one is titled Cease Fire. And you see a firefighter having his hose on full blast, but on the left-hand side, you see an African-American hand up against the nozzle, stopping the force of the pressure. The backstory behind that is the African-American hand. He was the first Black firefighter in a town called Montclair, New Jersey. When he first became a firefighter, he encountered a lot of racism right in the fire department. At one time, he shared a story with me that somebody ground up pieces of glass in his boots and he didn't know it. But when the fire alarm went off, he threw on his coat, his overalls, and when he put on his boot, he cut his foot severely, and he couldn't even go out to save someone else's life because somebody was trying to damage his life. But he endured. And in that, as I speak, he is now he's now the fire chief of that town. So that just speaks a lot of endurance. And I wanted to create a picture to really exemplify that, not only what he had to go through, but all of the teenagers that were doused with fire hoses in places like Alabama in the 1960s. This picture is called Wait, I Can't Pick a Minute. And a lot of times in my pictures for the Red, White, Blue, and You series, you will see cotton as a theme, nooses as a theme, the American flag, and the American flag colors. Here you see a set of older hands stopping a set of younger Black hands to reach to a cotton plant. Cotton representing slavery and a slave mentality. And those hands are stopping this young man from going back to a way of thinking that is self-destructive, that is anti-productive, not only for himself, but also for our people. So I entitled that Wait, I Cotton Pick a Minute. This picture is very personal to me. It's called Made in America. My grandmother and my aunt, they both were domestics in Alabama. A lot of people will call them housekeepers. They were domestics in Alabama. And when I used to live in Alabama for a few years growing up, when I was 5 and 6, I would go to work with them during the summer. And I remember one day in particular being with my grandmother, and she was cooking dinner for this very wealthy family. And again, I was 5. So I didn't know exactly everything that was going on, but I knew enough to get the gist of what was happening. So I overheard after the dinner was served and after the family ate, the father of the house told my grandmother to come back to the table. And her name was Clara. And he told my grandmother, Clara, why don't you take the leftovers home for you and your family? And my grandmother said, there are no leftovers. It's just the food that's on the table here. And the food that's really like, not even the food that's in any pots or pans, but the food that is on your plates. And he was like, yeah, that's what I mean. Like, take this food home and, feed your family. So my grandmother didn't say anything. She packaged the food. We waited for our ride. We went home. And that night when we came home, she didn't say anything about it. It was different times back then, but she visually walked me over to the garbage can and I saw her throw away that food. I'm sorry. I saw her throw away that food into the garbage can. And then she walked over to the kitchen and prepared to make a beautiful meal from scratch. We never talked about that moment, but it always stayed embedded in my mind, that incident. And I knew as an adult and as a anti-racist photographer, I wanted to create an image to really talk about that and how that really impacted me emotionally. So here you see an image of a man to the left, a made man, M-A-D-E, walking on the American flag, leaving a trail of dirt, which represents all of the injustices that he has created from the time that the first pilgrims landed in this country up until now. And then we see on the right-hand side, a Black woman cleaning up other people's mess. These two people are going in two different directions. They're not even acknowledging each other, but they're both doing what they feel necessary to happen to keep America going. So here you see made in America. When the pandemic hit, it really threw everybody into a tailwind. People didn't know where to find toilet tissue. We didn't know if anybody was going to make it out. And I've lost several people, people that were close to me. Even more people that I love and care about has contracted COVID. There's a few people right now that I know who are fighting for their lives, literally. And even with all that said, some people still taking this as a joke and as a hoax and all of that. So I knew I wanted to create an image to really reflect what a lot of people are going through during COVID. And I created this triptych called Protective Face Masks. And I'm very honored to say that this image was selected by the Newark Art Museum to be in their upcoming exhibit in June. So I'm very proud and excited that this piece was selected. But in that you see 3 face masks, each one is dripping the colors of Americana. This picture is titled, I Too Cry for America. And in this picture, you see 3 people of color crying tears for all of the injustices that's happening in America. They're blindfolded, which is a whole play on justice being blind. And for a person of color, that
I
really
think he's in the
reigns
back.
true. That really reigns true because I feel that a lot of times people that look like me, it feels like we are not being seen in a judicial way, where a lot of times you could have all the facts and everything could be in our favor, and we could still get mistreated. We could still be jailed, or if we are being threatened or even killed, the person or people who've done this crime a lot of times walk away scot-free. So this title is inspired by a Langston Hughes poem, and I named it I Too Cry for America. Which leads me to photographic self-representation. And that's a fancy phrase that one of my heroes, Frederick Douglass, often talked about when he had over 160 portraits taken of him during his lifetime. He was the most photographed individual from the 19th century, more than Abraham Lincoln, more than Grant, more than any other person in the United States. He had his photograph captured. And he did that for a reason. Because during that time, if you look over to the left-hand side, you see a picture of a caricature called Jim Crow. And if you don't know the history of Jim Crow, it goes way before the Jim Crow laws of the 1960s. But Jim Crow was a song and a dance created by an entertainer, a white entertainer named Thomas Daddy Rice. And he made fun of Black people by putting burnt cork on his face and acting in a buffoonish type of way. And an artist created this illustration back in the 1830s. The power of that illustration is still reigning true today because a lot of Caucasian people who didn't have firsthand contact with Black people, they thought all Black people looked and acted that way. So going back to Frederick Douglass, he knew this, so he made it a point to always present himself in a regal type of way. He never smiled. He made sure his clothes were pristine. And at the time, it was in vogue for the person who were being photographed to not look at the camera. But with his piercing eyes, the majority of his photographs, Frederick Douglass made sure that he made contact. In photography, we call that the gaze. He made a connect gaze into the audience, really piercing right through their souls, showing that you can look at an educated Black man who's not going to propagate the buffoonery that you're used to. So with that, I've created several images that are taken from historical moments. This one is called Whistling Dixie, Ode to Emmett Till. Emmett Till was killed back in 1955 simply for whistling at a white woman. That's all. That's all he did was whistle at a white woman. 2 days later, he was pulled out of his family's home that he was visiting in a town called Money, Mississippi. He was beat up, he was lynched, and his body was found a few days later, totally mangled. And I wanted to create a photograph to really show the power of that whistle and how that ended him and how that brought the end to his life. If you look very carefully, you can see the notes leaving this young man's mouth, which leads to somebody actually being lynched. That photograph is of an actual photograph of somebody who was lynched in the early 1900s. This picture is entitled, well, the original title was 8 minutes and 46 seconds, but now that we've known that the knee was actually on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, this picture was dedicated to George Floyd, and we all should know his story. If you haven't seen the video, You should definitely watch the video, no matter how disturbing it is. We actually saw a modern day lynching last May. And when I saw it, that was the last good cry that I had. I was in tears. So I saw a man who was my age who was killed in front of an audience of people. Um, and I'm still getting choked up as I speak about it now. So when it happened, I knew that I had to create a photograph to really show myself in that person's place. So a few days later, I had a friend of mine actually nail his body onto my body and onto my neck specifically. And I did a self-portrait. We did this in 3 takes. And when I tell you that my neck was hurting for 3 days afterwards, simply because he was on my neck for 15 seconds, I can only imagine the pain that George Floyd went through for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. So that's why I created this image of me looking directly into the camera. This image is entitled Illegal Lynching. That's a play on words there. And it's dedicated to Breonna Taylor. Breonna Taylor, award-winning EMT officer who was lynched last year. And I created this photograph earlier this year where you see a hangman's noose. And inside the circle of the noose, you see a t-shirt, an EMT t-shirt, showing what she did and what she took pride in doing. And she really loved her city. She loved her family. And unfortunately, she is not able to enjoy her life because she was killed unjustly. This picture is entitled Welcome Home, Ode to Amadou Diallo. The original photo was created in 1999 when he was killed, back in February of 1999. And then I recreated that first photograph and I shortened it in 2019. The first photograph had 41 bullets and 19 of them were knocked down, which indicated the 41 bullets that were shot at Amadou Diallo, and 19 of those bullets hit his body. He didn't have a gun. He wasn't a criminal. He was simply walking into his home and he pulled out a key from his wallet, and there were 4 cops that thought he was a criminal and they killed him, executed him, lynched him. So I created this photograph that really dictates that this could happen to anybody in America. And that's why we see the red, white, and blue bullets on the top of his doorstep. I'm going to speed up a little bit. This picture is called African Unity. This is one of the first fine art photographs that I created back in 1994. Over to the right, this picture is called Justice or Just Us. I created that in 2018. This picture is of a dear friend of mine. I've met him maybe 10 years ago. I'm not going to go too deep into his background, but he had a rough few years. And I will say that at one point, he was battling drug and alcoholism, and he got clean and sober, as we say. So he wasn't using any substances at all. He became a Christian. He really turned his life around. He was really doing well. He got reunited with his family. Prior to that, he was really running the streets of Camden, and he was doing some really horrible things there. People were really scared of him, and I'll leave it at that. But once he turned his life around, I had the idea of using him as a subject for a photograph of the prodigal son story that you can find in the Bible. And in that, I shared that I wanted to create an image where you would see somebody with all this mud over his face. And that's what happened with the prodigal son, where at one point after he left his father's house, he spent all this money, he found himself in a pig's pen eating what the pigs wouldn't eat. That's pretty low. That's a pretty bad situation. And that really related to me with his story. And instantly when we talked about it, he said, yeah, let's do it, bro. And I poured about 5 gallons of mud on him. And I asked him to just keep focusing on God, keep asking God to help him, and just keep praying to him. And that's one of the pictures that I took of him. And one of my favorite photos, by the way. And he just passed away a couple of months, actually not even a couple months ago, a couple of weeks ago. His funeral was last week. And I was honored to not only take the photograph on his left-hand side, and that's one of the few photographs that his family has of him, but also the photograph to the right that shows his willingness to promote the artistry that I was trying to promote through the Bible. So, salute to my friend. Over to the left, that picture is called Monisha Liché, which is a remixed version of the Mona Lisa, which to me, the Mona Lisa is the first Kardashian. She got famous for doing absolutely nothing. And in this, I wanted to create a portrait of a woman who is not only externally beautiful, but she's highly intelligent. She's really community oriented. And I just wanted to highlight the beauty in gaining your college education and really going back to your community and serving in that way. And speaking of serving your community, this is my friend Reek over to the right. He's a part of a group called Watu Moja, WATUMOJA. They do a lot of community development in Camden and throughout the world. If you don't know about them, definitely look them up on their website and you can find out a lot about what they're doing worldwide. But he knew that I had a series called Children of Cotton, where I am photographing millennials holding an actual cotton plant. And this is the one and only picture that I took of him, and he nailed it. If you look at the way that he's looking, not only at me, but through me and at the audience, his gaze is just phenomenal. And everybody that I showed this photo to, they're just amazed at the way that he is able to connect emotionally with the viewer simply through a photograph. So, Children of Cotton. Over to the left, that's a photograph inspired by the civil rights movement. I am a man. And over to the right, this was taken at our recent rally. Actually, it was the anniversary of the March on Washington in 2020. And this young man, he had to be about 11 years old. He was walking around with his bullhorn, and his mother allowed me to take this photograph, and I entitled it, See Me, Hear Me, Feel Me. And I believe this is my last photograph before we go into Q&A. This title is A Reconciliation, and it's a triptych where you see a white hand reaching out to a black hand. And it's a triptych, which for this photograph works well for me because it shows that it's a process for reconciliation to happen between the races. There's a lot of conversations that need to happen. There's a lot of action that needs to happen. There's a lot of crying, tears, and we're going to have to work through some anger that we're all going to have to collectively embrace in order for the beauty to manifest. And if you look carefully on the right-hand side, you'll see a scar on the black man's arm. And that to me symbolized the 400 plus years of the scars that we've received, starting from slavery up until now. But for these two individuals to have the courage to extend themselves to one another and to show racial reconciliation, I hope that will serve as a catalyst for other people to know that they could do the same. And with that, I am opening it up to questions or comments that you may have.
If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, or if you want to ask them directly, you can certainly do that as well. I'm gonna stop the share so we can, see Eric, okay. Well, it was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. Your work is absolutely amazing. And I think those stories are gonna stick with us for some time. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, let's see if we have any questions coming in. Also, if you have questions and you want to ask them directly, you're certainly free to do so. You can either raise an electronic hand or raise your real hand, and then we can call on you to unmute you. We have just a lot of comments saying thank you so much. Tremendous presentation. No questions, just feeling of truth, heartbreak, and hope. Phenomenal work. Thank you for sharing. I think you've left us all speechless, Erik, with your work.
Well, listen, I really appreciate you all for taking time to hear my artistic practice and to really hear my heart. For me, being an artist is all about giving back. Simone once said that it's the artist's duty to really reflect the times that we live in. And I really feel that it's important for me to do that as an individual and also in the multitude of ways that I serve the community here in Camden and throughout the United States. I'm a part of the board here at Camden Fireworks. I serve as a city arts commissioner here in Camden. I teach at various schools and universities. So I'm always trying to give back. I think that's very important. And I'm always sharing my personal stories because, like I shared with you earlier today, before we went live, I feel that it's very important for people to learn from other people's mistakes so they won't have to repeat them later on. And I think that's where wisdom comes in at. So if I could share a story or an experience with a young person and let them know how to get to a place faster or easier than I had, then I'm here for that. And I think that's really the focus of my foundation and my artistry.
Great. We did have one question come in. I think you touched on this a little in the beginning of your presentation, but you mentioned as soon as you picked up a camera, you knew that was for you and you just fell in love with the camera. But what made you pick up the camera? What was it that spurred you into finding out that photography was yours?
Yeah, great question. Two things. Records. For those of us of a certain age, we remember 12-inch records, and on those album covers, they would have this beautiful artwork because that's how they sold the records. A lot of times, if you didn't know the artist, the artwork on the album would really gravitate you to purchase the album. So I would look at albums while I'm listening to records and just really gravitate to that artwork. And then old photo albums. I would look through photo albums while listening to music, and I would start to understand composition, lighting, gaze, things of that nature, background, foreground, everything like that. And I was learning photography without understanding all the concepts behind it, but I was really getting that first wave of education that way. And it's funny, when I was in high school, I remember it like it was yesterday. I didn't take any professional classes. I had like little rinky-dink cameras like anyone else during my age group, nothing professional. But I knew when I filled out the form of what college I was going to go to and what I wanted to pursue as a professional career, and I had to answer these questions for my yearbook, it was like an epiphany. I wrote photography. I remember like it was yesterday. And several months later, I got my first camera and I started documenting the times afterwards. So it was records, album covers, and divine intervention.
Oh, we are certainly glad you picked up that camera. So thank you for that and all the work that you're doing. Let's see, we have another question. What advice would you give to a budding artist who seeks to tell the stories of their life and the lives of others?
Great question. I think that everybody should find out who they are, like themselves, then love themselves. From there, you could really start to, if you're an artist, then you could start to create really breathtaking works of art. we live in a day and time that we see so much appropriation happening where it's easy for artists to just mimic somebody else, for somebody to just cheat and feel like, oh, I'm going to be inspired by somebody, but you're really just copying. And I mentioned earlier that I started off being a graffiti artist, and being a graffiti artist, it was all about being original. You had to find your own name, you had to find your own voice, your style, everything. And I bring that to my photography artistry. So to answer your question, I would say for anybody who really wants to pursue photography, definitely learn everything that you can about the camera. If you can, try to learn film photography. That will really educate you on taking fewer photos to really get your story recorded in a few images, because you will only have 24 or 36 pictures per roll as opposed to 10,000 photos on your digital camera. So you start to think a lot differently. And then lastly, tell your own story, right? Tell your own story from your own perspective. And when you do so, you're going to find your audience. And believe me, your audience is just waiting for you to produce your artwork. They're already out here. But as soon as you start creating and sharing your own artistry from your perspective, your audience will manifest itself. So I hope that helps.
Answer. Okay. So one last question before we wrap things up here. What type of additional support do you need to sustain your Camden project?
Great question. 5 letters, M-O-N-E-Y. Money is always helpful. Running a nonprofit and a small nonprofit, I don't have a large staff. I have a great board, and we're doing miracles with a small body of professionals that are coming to the table every time we meet. But money, whether it's financial donations, I've had people donate equipment. When I showed you my dark room, about 90% of that equipment is donated from several patrons that I've met over the past 10 years. And people just found out about my foundation and they said, hey, I would love to help educate kids through you. Here, take this. Just awesome. So I've had people donate money, equipment. I've had people share actual physical support. I've had people, one of the people is actually on the line now, Bill May, who, if you don't know about him, he is a noteworthy photographer from Newark. He has 60 plus years in photography in Newark. He really helped guide me to be, he really passed the baton to me and say, keep going. So more than money, the words that he said to me will help give me the fuel to pass it on to the next person. So all of the things that I said will help me to help create projects in Newark and throughout the world.
Great. Well, thank you again so much for today's presentation. It was absolutely amazing, and sharing your work and your stories is so important to the world, but particularly to South Jersey and to Camden. So we were so pleased that you could partner with us today and with Cooper's Ferry and A New View Camden to bring this session to everyone. There will be a post-session email coming out with a recording link within a couple of days. I will make sure to include all of the links and information that Erik has talked about today, upcoming exhibitions, how you can get in touch with him, how you can find out more about his foundation and the work that he's doing there. So I'll put all of that in an email so you don't have to scramble to Google him to death today. It's also his birthday, so everybody say happy birthday to Erik before we close today. Happy birthday to Erik. Thanks for taking time out of your special day to be with us. We really do appreciate that. And there's also a link in the chat for everyone to fill out a short survey about today's session to let us know how we're doing. If you have suggestions for other artists or topics, we really want to hear from you so we can do what we're doing better. We won't keep you much longer. I just want to say everyone have a wonderful day, and we hope to see you at next month's session. Thank you.
Thank you.